I thought I was going crazy, but I didn't know what crazy was. It was that bad.
They volunteered, signed papers, and they trusted the uniform. But what they didn't know was that for nearly 3 decades, classified Cold War research turned them into test subjects. The mission was said to be defense, but inside the locked chambers at Edgewood Arsenal, the line between protection and harm blurred. Edgewood Arsenal sits along the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland, inside the Aberdeen Proving Ground, a U.S. Army facility. On paper, it's a research center. In reality, especially in the Cold War years, it became the heart of America's chemical warfare testing. World War I had already shown the world what chemicals could do. Mustard gas burned the skin and lungs. Chlorine and phosgene choked the air. Those memories didn't fade. By the 1950s, U.S. leaders believed that the Soviet Union was stockpiling chemicals and studying new ones. And if American troops were hit, would our masks, suits, and antidotes actually work? That question is how we get to Edgewood. Starting after World War II and running into mid-1970s, the U.S. Army's Chemical Corps ran a series of controlled human experiments here, officially to elevate low-dose exposure, protective gear, and medical countermeasures. In the mid-1950s, the Army formalized part of this as the Medical Research Volunteer Program. Over roughly 20 years, about 6,700 U.S. soldiers, and even some civilians, rotated through studies. In total, more than 250 different substances were used across the program. Those substances range from the old and familiar irritants and mustard agents to the most feared nerve agents of the Cold War, like Sarin and VX. Mixed in were psychoactive compounds, LSD, PCP, cannabinoid derivatives, and an anticholinergic, incapacitating agent nicknamed BZ. Some trials were about protective masks and clothing, some were about performance under stress, and some were direct exposure at controlled doses to see what happened to a human being in real time. On paper, it was all defense. In practice, it often meant real men, real chemicals, stopwatches,
How do
and
you feel?
clipboards.
I feel pretty good, sir.
Do you? Are you cold?
No, I'm not cold at all.
Are you tired?
No, I'm not tired. Well, I could run.
Could do some more, could you?
Yes, sir. I could run. I run 100 miles right now.
Is that right? You
That's
feel
right.
Pretty.
The test subjects weren't prisoners. They were mostly young American servicemen, late teens, early 20s, fresh out of basic training. Recruiters pitched Edgewood as a temporary duty assignment for, quote, medical research. The schedule sounded good. Lighter duty, more predictable hours, better barracks, sometimes weekends off. For a lot of guys, that beat long marches and kitchen patrol. Volunteers signed consent forms. That part is important. There was paperwork, but many forms were general. They didn't always name the exact agent, dose, or specific risks. Some men later said that they felt like they didn't fully understand what they were agreeing to. Others said it didn't feel easy to say no. Either way, once they arrived, the routine looked simple. Medical checks, baseline tests, and then the trial. A typical day might start with fitness checks, cognitive tasks, and equipment drills. Then a doctor or technician would explain that you'd be taking part in an exposure or an evaluation. Sometimes it was a pill or a shot. Sometimes it meant stepping into a sealed chamber. Sometimes the dose was on the skin. From the outside, it looked controlled and clinical, but from the inside, it could be one of the strangest and terrifying days of your life. Here's what inside the tests actually meant. First, baseline tasks: assemble a rifle, walk a straight line, and solve a simple puzzle. Then read incoming messages while answering quick math. And then, the dose. After that, you'd repeat the same tasks while doctors measured what changed. Reaction times, accuracy, mood, memory, or motor control. Some trials were mild and ended with nothing worse than a headache, but some were not. BZ became the program's most infamous drug. It's an anticholinergic, and it blocks part of the brain's chemical messaging system. Even tiny amounts could trigger delayed confusion, vivid hallucinations, and delirium that lasted days, not hours. People forgot who they were. Some talked to people who weren't there, others tried to complete tasks, while their short-term memory kept erasing itself. One of the best documented trials was a mock communications outpost in the early 1960s. 4 soldiers stayed in the stocked hut for 3 days. Cameras rolled. 1 got a placebo, and 2 got a standard BZ dose. 1 got a high incapacitating dose. When a simulated chemical alarm sounded, the placebo and moderate dosed men struggled but could still function. The high dose subject could not even get his gas mask on without help, and stayed awake and hallucinating for roughly 36 hours.
When a simulated chemical alarm sounded,
The lesson for the Army was blunt. A small team can be crippled even if one person is fully incapacitated. LSD was tested too. At the same time, the CIA had MK Ultra going on. The Army was running its own controlled studies at Edgewood. Doses varied, and so did reactions. Some participants experienced euphoria and laughter, others had intense anxiety, fear, or paranoia. In some tests, people felt like they were dying, while monitors showed stable vital signs. By the early 1960s, the Army moved away from LSD for field use. It disrupted performance, but it wasn't reliably incapacitating for long enough under pressure. And then there were the nerve agents, Sarin and VX. Trials used low, sublethal doses under medical supervision, sometimes to assess symptoms, sometimes to evaluate antidotes. Even at low levels, nerve agents can cause pinpoint pupils, sweating, twitching, nausea, chest tightness, and confusion. And at high levels, they can lead to seizures, paralysis, and even death. These Edgewood studies were specifically designed to avoid lethal exposures, but they made clear how fast the nervous system can fail, and how quickly antidotes need to be delivered to matter. Edgewood also studied mustard gas agents, old, ugly weapons from World War I. In controlled skin patch tests, researchers watched for delayed burns and blisters, and tested protective ointments. Some volunteers later kept small scars where patches had been applied. Not every participant had a dramatic reaction, many didn't. But the range of what was tested and the depth of human responses measured were far wider than most volunteers expected when they signed up to simply test equipment. So what happened when the truth started leaking out? In 1975, the Army shut the Medical Research Volunteer Program down, and the BZ stockpile was later destroyed by 1989. For years, most files stayed vague, and many veterans believed that they were legally gagged and couldn't say anything. However, decades later, the Army began loosening secrecy so former test subjects could actually talk to their doctors about what had happened. And one name sits at the center of the legal fight: James B. Stanley, a U.S. Army Master Sergeant who said he was secretly dosed with LSD at Edgewood in 1958 and later spiraled with psychological problems. He sued, and in 1987, the Supreme Court, United States v. Stanley, ruled that service members can't sue the Army for injuries indecent to service. That decision slammed the door on damages for many others. Even as the story of Edgewood was finally hitting the public, accountability took a different path. In 2000 to 2010, courts pressed the Army to notify surviving test subjects about what they had been exposed to and to keep them informed about new health information, an ongoing duty to warn. It wasn't money, but it mattered. And for the first time, some veterans got official letters naming the chemicals and pointing them towards care. So what did the health picture look like? On paper, big. Reviews said they couldn't find consistent long-term effects across the whole group, partly because the records were thin and follow-ups were limited, but the individual stories kept piling up. Breathing problems, tremors, neurological issues, memory loss, night terrors, and PTSD-like symptoms. Some men had blister scars from mustard applications, others described lingering vision and focus problems after anticholinergic drugs or LSD. Not every case can be proven and traced right back to Edgewood itself, and we can't claim universal causation, but for the people living it, the pattern felt impossible to ignore. Edgewood's defenders said it was about defense. Learn the limits of the masks, suits, and antidotes before a real attack. But the secrecy, the vague consent, and the bad choice of young American soldiers as test beds crossed the line. It showed how fear can bend ethics until protection and harm look the same. The buildings on the Chesapeake Bay are still there. The rules are tighter now, though. Informed consent, independent review, and more oversight. For the veterans who carried the aftermath, the breath that never came easy again, and the hands that wouldn't stop shaking, the nights that wouldn't end, those protections arrived too late. Edgewood isn't just a Cold War footnote. It's a warning about what happens when secrecy outruns duty, and a reminder that the people we ask to serve shouldn't have to wonder what was really in the mask, the syringe, or the air. Hello everyone. As always, if you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. If you're new around here, welcome, and I hope you enjoyed as well. I post new videos every week, usually shooting for Friday or Saturdays, around 6 p.m. EST, but we're still trying to get it worked out. If you did enjoy today's video, please like, comment, and maybe even consider subscribing. It really helps push these videos out there and it gets them in front of more people. Any feedback or recommendations, drop them in the comments and I'll get to them there. If you want to watch something similar, check out my last video I did on Anthrax Island. You don't want to miss it. That's all I have for this one. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.